Okay, so again, we'll just highlight what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be covering the composite tables. We'll talk a little bit about named item files. And we'll talk a little bit about automating to export. And we'll talk a little bit about as time permits for doing specialized row formatting by column. We're also searching views for special matches, not just for specific fields, but also for other places in your record or review. So I apologize for not clicking the play button. Okay, what I've done now, I've just simply opened up a workspace that has the customer master list and also the customer transactions file. And a common request is to have the customer name appear in the customer transaction file, or other things like perhaps the salesperson code or other information that might be in the balance, the customer master file. So what I can do is I can highlight, if I happen to have the customer master view already created and open on my screen, I can right-click on a particular field and choose an option on the pop-up that says copy custom column to another view. So I can copy this, and then over here in where I want to actually have the customer name appear is just to right-click and choose the option to paste column from another view, and all of a sudden the name appears, and I can just drag it where I want. And so now I've got the customer transactions view now contains the name. I'm able to do this because there happens to be a field that's common between them both, the customer number, and so therefore there's an easy relationship between my customer master and my customer transactions. Another way that you can choose to do this sort of thing is by accessing a function from the edit menu if you don't already happen to have a particular view created. So let's say, for example, you're interested in having a job number or something from your job estimates file appear in the same view as your customer transactions. We don't have a composite table already created that links the customer transaction to the job number, but there is something common between the two fields, is that the customer transaction file maintains the job number, and so does, of course, things like the job estimates file in Adagio job cost. If you don't already happen to have a view created, you can use a function called edit insert related column. If you already happen to have a view on your job numbers, you can certainly open it and do the drag and drop just like we saw here. But if you don't already happen to have that view and you just want to simply just grab a couple fields from another place, you can come to here, edit insert related column, and all of the, and then you select the table that you want. And Adagio GridView will automatically list all of the available tables that have predefined links that will be appropriate based on that. And so you can choose to grab something from the job estimates file or the job master file. Maybe you want to get the job name, for example. So I can go to the job master file and say OK, and then perhaps get the job description. Or I can multi-select and pick different things if you want. So you can do one or multiple fields. Let's say just pick the description one for the job description. And so then that will bring that through. And then any of these invoices or cash payments that were related to a job would have jobs on them, it would show the job description. And then, of course, I can rename that to just simply call it job description or job name and so forth. So there's something from the job master file. Or if I wanted to add something else from the job estimates file, you can certainly do that as well, too. So it's just a matter of selecting the table that's available for you and then picking the field that you want. So using this option, edit insert related column, or the drag and drop, is a way of taking tables that are related to each other and have predefined relationships in the dictionary, and GridView will automatically select those for you. So hopefully that will make some of your view creation a little bit easier if you have tables that aren't automatically created. Let's close this workspace. We won't save those changes. The next thing I'm going to show you is what happens if you have tables that you want to add together in a single view, but they don't already have predefined relationships in the Adagio dictionary. So let me just open up another workspace. And I happen to have one here that has a view in the order entry detail file. And it's a simple view that shows outstanding orders and then items that have a quantity on back order. And down here below, I have a second view that's related to the purchase order details, And this shows a listing of all of the purchase order details where there's purchase order information outstanding. As we're looking at our order entry view, it may be interesting to identify, well, I've got some orders on back order. Have we already purchased them? And if so, I'm not going to issue a new purchase order for them. But if I haven't yet, I will want to ensure that a purchase order has been made for these items so that I can then ship them to my customer. So if I were to go into my Edit Insert Related column and look at my purchase orders, and the only predefined link in the dictionaries is the sundry items, well, that's not interesting. I want to get the PO details. So therefore, I can't use this particular process to add information from the PO details file into my order entry view. So what I can do instead is I would first create a workspace, just as I've done now, that shows the information that I want. So I've got my order entry details view, and it's got an item number. I could certainly, in previous releases, I can double-click on an item just to see, well, do I have that particular item on a purchase order? No, I don't. Or I can keep on double-clicking and guessing to see if anything, but it may not be immediately available. Instead of keeping on double-clicking and not getting anything, what I can do is I actually want to add the information to the order entry view. And so what I can do instead is I'll just open this up a little bit, is that I can actually use a formula in order to read an open view and grab information from there. In order to be able to use this formula, I need to have a column that is common to both views. In this case, I'm interested in connecting by the item number. I have an item number that has a back order. I want to be able to see if it exists on a purchase order. If I need to look at the item number on the purchase orders. So what I'm essentially doing is creating a lookup file that has the purchase orders details, in this case, and I need to sort this view by that same field, the item number. You can see that it's got the little green arrow, which means, or the green line that means that this view is sorted by that column. And so the functionality of this formula is very similar to the VLOOKUP that you may be already familiar with in Microsoft Excel. So let me just go ahead and edit this formula for you, just so you can see it. So this is called Get Linked Value. And let me just talk a little bit about this formula before I actually show you. It works a little bit like VLOOKUP, and essentially there are three parameters that are associated with this formula. The first one is the view name. What additional view do you want to look up from? In this case, it's our purchase orders view. What field is common between two of them? In our case, it's the item number field. And what information do you want to add to our view? In this case, it's the purchase order number, or it could be a purchase order quantity, or so forth. So essentially, the purpose of using this formula could be, oh, I want to grab a field value from another view and insert it into my existing view so that I can have them combined together, but there isn't a predefined dictionary link. This is also something that's available is if you have multiple lookup records that match. You've got the item ordered multiple times on a purchase order. A customer has purchased this, has multiple back orders for the same item number. What this function will do is grab the first one. So you have the opportunity of saying, well, what was my oldest or what was my most recent order for a customer? You can use this formula to do that kind of thing. Instead of showing all the orders for a customer, you could show what's the order number or the invoice number for my most recent invoice number for the customer. So a very simple example might be go look for a vendor list view, grab the, based on the vendor number, grab the name. So it's a way of reading the name into one of my specific views. You can also use this formula for doing summary or subtotal amounts. So this function allows you to do formulas or filters based on subtotal amounts, and that's something that you're not able to do with functions on just a single view. So what you can actually do is create two identical views of each other in a workspace. One of them shows details, and the other one is summarized and shows subtotals, and then you just grab the subtotal amount and use that in the formula, and we'll show you an example of that in a bit. So an example of that, how that might look is you take a transaction file and you summarize it by customer number, and then the subtotal of all the current amounts can be used in other views from order entry or from AR or from whatever. So if we go back to our inquiry, just to show you how this looks, we've got Get Linked Value, and we're going to look at the PO Details view. So there's the PO Details view that we've got created, and you notice it's in double quotes. field that's in common is the item number, and the field that we want to read into our view is the document number. And so when we say OK, that formula will say, okay, go into the other view, PO details. For this particular item, GL-Cal008, look to see if there's a non-blank document number field on that row. If I double-click on it, you'll see that GL-Cal008 actually happens to have 2. And as we alluded to before, it will grab the information for the first one because it can't combine results in a single cell. So this one happens to have 2, but it outputs the results of the first one. And then there's another one here that happens to have a purchase order, a single one in this case. And so that enables you to see the information for what PO numbers is available. Well, let's create a new one just so you can see the process of how it works adding a new one. Let's say that we're also interested, let's refresh this, and saying not only the purchase order number, but how much was actually ordered. So in this case, the quantity on back order is how much we're waiting for it to be received on a particular purchase order. We're not interested in seeing what was originally ordered because some of it's already been done, but let's see how much is actually left on order. So we'll want to grab the quantity on back order field. How we do that is we'll come down here and we'll add a new calculated column. And we'll call it quantity on PO. And just to save time typing, I've already copied and pasted this formula. So get linked value, we want to read the PO details view. We want to link by item number. And instead of the document number, the field that we want to grab is the one that's called quantity on back order. And so you notice that all 3 of those parameters are in double quotes. And so when we grab this quantity on back order and say OK, we can see that it grabs a number. And if we want to see this information here, you can see that the quantity on back order here is 3. And so that's what gets reported here. Or the quantity on back order is 40. So that's what gets reported here. So you can grab information from other views and essentially create your own composite table so you can combine multiple tables into a single view using formulas. So here's an example of just grabbing information from another workspace. Just close that. Let me give you another example of what you might be able to do. So here's an example of a workspace where I have 2 identical views that are essentially the same. This one is the customer transaction file. We can tell that, or sorry, the customer master file, sorry. And it has all the customers and their invoice total year to date. And we have the exact same report here, AR customer master. And the only difference between the 2 is that although they are both sorted by salesperson, this one is summarized. We can see that this one has the summarize option turned on, but if I click on this view on the above, the summarize option's off. So in this one over here, I happen to have subtotals for each of my invoice totals year to date for each salesperson. And I've got a similar, we'll edit that, get linked value, go look at the view AR invoice by SP2, so there's the secondary view. The common field is the salesperson field, and the information that I want to grab is the invoice total year to date. So basically what it does is it looks for the salesperson field, RD, comes down here, and finds the same RD, comes across to look for the invoice total year to date, takes that number, it doesn't matter that it's not a detail, subtotals are just fine, and then brings it back and outputs here. This is an example of using a subtotal field for a formula. For example, if you want to see the customer, each customer's percentage of total. So for this particular salesperson RD, customer Able Cables has invoice year-to-date sales of 8.75% of all the total sales for RD. And you can do this, and you can see the same thing for each of my salespersons in this list. What if you wanted to be able to do a percentage of the grand total? Well, you can certainly do that as well too, but you're required to use a different formula. There's a second formula available called get linked result. And it's a little bit simpler. You don't have to, it doesn't matter what salesperson, you just simply want the invoice year-to-date grand total. It doesn't matter which salesperson, you're not looking at the details. So you just have to find the lookup view and find the column that you want to find the grand total from. And it doesn't have to be a total. Certainly those are typical, but you can certainly choose to do other summaries, like if you want to find the average or the maximum or the minimum. So an example of grabbing this is if you happen to have a view called AR trans for the AR transactions, just grab the grand total for all the current amount fields. So I happen to have a total such as this already predefined. So here's my total year to date. You can see that the 391,000 and the 391,000, there's the grand total information here. And if I edit that, you can see just like that we saw in our PowerPoint listing, get linked result. That's a bit different from get linked value. And there's two parameters, one the view name, AR invoiced by salesperson 2, and then the column that I want to grab, the grand total or the grand summary operation, invoice total year to date. So it finds that amount and then outputs it into our column here. And so therefore we can do formulas that say, actually I'll just edit that. So then now we can do, if that total isn't equal to 0, then go ahead and do a grand percentage of total. So you can use these calculated columns in formulas or in filters as well too. So therefore, here we happen to have a display of a customer percentage of total. So Abel's Cables is 3.69% of my total year-to-date sales across my entire customer database. So you can see that we're adding more power to the formulas simply by creating a second view, which is identically the same, and summarizing it. So therefore, you can use subtotals or grand totals in formulas. Close that workspace. So there's a few examples of doing composite tables. The next area I'd like to investigate is something called named item files. And this is a function that's been in Adagio GridView for some time, but it's one of those functions that you tend not to need until you recognize that you have a very specific type of thing you want to do that it isn't possible to do with the available linking or the available formula. So essentially, let me just go to the function just to try to describe it a little bit. If you go to the Edit menu, here's something called named items. And you've probably seen this before and go, I don't know what that is. I don't need it. Just to describe it briefly, essentially what a named item file really is this a text file that stores a number of translations or comparisons. So if you see a value A, I want to replace it with value X. So if you have a customer number, I want to associate it with some additional text or an additional number. Or if I have a particular item number or a particular description, you put the value of that in the name field, and the resulting value that you would like to use in a formula or in a filter would be associated here. So let's just create a couple here and see what type of file gets created. So in order to create it manually, there's ways to do it manually or automated as far as changing it to Excel, but I'll just do it automated or the manual way just so we can get a feel for what the relationship looks like. I'll click New Item, and let's say that I want to relate things to customer numbers. So I have some data, information that's not stored in Adagio anywhere, but I want to be able to associate this information, whether it's text or a number or a date, with the customer number. So I'll put in the customer number here in the name field, and here is some extra text stuff. And you could, essentially, when I save this, every time I can use a special formula that says every time I see this value, which in this case is a customer number, it will output the result that's in the value field. And I can do that for multiple customers, BCSO1, some other text, or perhaps you could even do numbers, CAPO 1 and 3.45, so there's some numbers and so on and so forth. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead, and you can do that manually for as few or as many as you want. And typically, you only need to do these for the customers that you want to do something with. If you've got 1,000 customers, but you only want to have these special things for 10, you don't have to enter these for all 1,000 customers, just the 10 that you require them. Let's just go ahead and save this file. And I happen to have a special location for some named items. You can choose to save them wherever you want. It doesn't matter. They don't have to be saved in the same place as your views. They can be saved in a separate location if you wish. I'll just simply call it demo, and it will look for a file extension for GV names, and you can see I've got a few already set up. So what exactly is a GV names file? Well, let me just open up Windows Explorer just to show you what it looks like. So let me just go to that directory. And let's just edit it with Notepad. This is simply a text file. It's nothing special. You can open it with Notepad. So basically all we have here is a text file where the text named items is in square brackets. And then remember those first values, in our case, customer numbers, and then an equal sign, and then after that, whatever stuff you have. And you'll notice that there's no spaces before the customer numbers. There's no spaces between the equal signs and the things. It's just a text file. I don't have to use that edit named files function in GridView in order. I can certainly add additional ones here. HID01 equals edited from Notepad, just so you can see this one. And then just save it. So that when I go into the edit named items and load the file and grab my demo, we can see that my HID01 was entered here, and so that's been added to the list. So it's just a simple text file. How would you go about actually using this information? We'll show you a very simple example. Let's create a new inquiry on the customer master list. And just to keep things simple, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add just the customer number. Okay. Oops. So there we go. We've got a view that has just the customer number. And then in order to grab that information from the named items file, either in a calculated column or in a filter, you can choose either, basically you have to create a new formula that gets that. So let's add a calculated column just so we can actually see the information on screen. And the named item text. And in the functions list, there's a function called getNamedItem. And so that function is what's specific to say, I've got a named items file, and I want to be able to read the information from that file and bring it into my view, either as a calculated column or as a workspace or any other way that you can use formulas in Adagio GridView. So getNamedItem, and the parameter that need to pass the getNamedItem is an S or a string, and the information here is actually the column or the customer number or the item number or the left side of the equal sign equation. And then the output will be whatever's on the right side of the equal sign. So I could certainly type in ABL01, or if I want to do it for all of my customers, really all I need to do is to insert my customer number field into as the parameter for the getNamedItem. And customer items could be 6 characters, they could be 5 or 4, and in sample data there are leading spaces. So just to ensure that the match is correct, it's advisable when you use this function to also use trim and put parentheses around. So basically, with our custom numbers that are stored in our database, in our case, in sample data, there's only 5 characters used, so there's a space. We need to trim that extra space out of the front so that we're actually matching apples to apples. So now when I save this, now we can see that that information, and I'll left justify it, is now available to be used in our inquiry. So this is an interesting way of grabbing information that's outside of our Adagio database and be able to use it in Adagio GridView. Well, how would you go about doing this in a more automated way? I mean, doing that editing one by one could be time intensive. So what I'm going to do instead is I'll just delete this. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my list of all of my customers, and I'm going to export it to Excel. And so here I have my customer list. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to use this to use Excel in order to put in information. And one particular reason why you might, just as an example of somewhat practical example of where you might use this is, let's say that you have commissions that you charge, and instead of charging them by the salesperson, you'll actually charge them by the customer. And there's no field in Adagio that stores the commission number by the customer. You could use an optional field, but just to highlight using this particular feature. You could also choose to have this information come from an external source that doesn't come in Adagio. And so how would you actually get that into GridView and relate to Adagio? Well, you would choose to export that information to an Excel spreadsheet, and you really only need two columns. One that has the customer number, and two would be the information that you want to use in GridView. So let's say, call it a commission percentage. And then you just simply type in the numbers or import or have the export from some other place. So maybe you've got some numbers, and it may be that you only have certain customers have an exception to the rule. Maybe all customers get charged 3% commission except for the ones that are listed in this list. And so this one's 1.5 and this one's 3.25. So basically you only have to put in the ones that are exceptions, because then you can use a GridView formula in order to fill in all these other ones that are blank, instead use the default 3. So basically you only have to use the ones that are the exceptions to the rule. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that file as, so demo commission, and get rid of that W, and save it as a CSV file. Because Excel has all this stuff and we need to convert it to text. And the CS file is easy to deal with because it will put a comma between the two fields, and then we'll be able to save it. So basically we just have to simply save it and close it. And then what we can do is, oops, I probably saved it in my documents file. So let's just move that to our named items location. And we'll rename that. Instead of a CSV, we'll just rename that to GV names. And we'll edit it with Notepad. And so now what we've got is something that looks pretty close. So basically all we have to do is replace that first column with named items and replace all of those commas with equal signs. Replace all. And so now what we've got is a text file, named items. We've got the layout that the named items file requires, but we were able to create it using an Excel sheet rather than doing it manually. And so we've got a particular set of customers, and we know this is our entire list since we've did an export. And we've got a few particular values. And let's go ahead and save this. And now what we can do is add that calculated column to this. First, we'll load it, named items. We'll load that file, demo customer commission. Okay. Now we'll add our calculated column. I just pressed F8 to load the calculated columns. Give it the title. What's the formula again? Get named items. And we want to trim the customer number. We'll see if that works. Okay, there we go. And so now we can see our commission numbers for just those customers that had something or reported, and then all of them are blanks. As we said before, you can use formulas to insert 3% in this example for all those that didn't have an exception. So again, we can just edit that formula and say, well, if the value of this happens to be blank, let me just copy it. So the value of that happens to be blank, then just simply output 3. Otherwise, grab the information that we've entered into that file. Okay, and F5 to refresh, and so there we go. So all those values that previously were blank are now 3. And so the purpose of doing this might be that you've got a database field such as our invoice total year-to-date sales. And so now we can go ahead and use this commission calculation and apply it to some number and do another calculated column that calculates the customer commissions, for example, or some other number. So you can use this user-specified set of numbers in order to use calculations or filters in GridView. If instead of having to remember, I won't worry about saving that. Instead of having to remember to load a named items file, you can go to the edit defaults, and you can choose to automatically load a specific named item file when you start GridView. And so there might, if you always want to load that thing, make sure that you don't have to remember to load F3 and load named item files. You can choose to browse and load the particular named item file, and then every time that you start GridView, it will automatically load that particular file. Another thing you can do is, actually maybe I'll get to that in just a second, is you can actually specify, I'll check the properties of a shortcut. Oops. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, that's interesting. Oops. Sorry, I have to do something different here. There we go. We'll show you how to do this in just a moment, but essentially what you can do is on a specific shortcut, you can choose to load a particular named items file by using a /n parameter on the shortcut in order to, whenever you load a particular workspace, you can also load a specific named items file. So certain views might require this named item file, and a different view workspace might require that named item file, and so therefore you can specify a particular selection for this one and a different one for that. Using this type of idea allows you to do security-based lookups. So just to show you what that might look like, let me just load up a workspace. Restrict department. So what I've got here is I've got a workspace based on the GL transactions, posted transactions file. You'll notice right now it's empty. And what I can do is I can choose to set up a view, and let me just look at the filter, that looks to find the department field, and it will say if the department field is listed in that get named items file, then I'll choose to load it. And so basically what I'm saying is, as long as the department field isn't blank, so I don't want to see balance sheet accounts, I'm going to only show income statement accounts in this view. And if I find that department field in the text that I want to put in the named item file, then I will allow you to look for it. And it will find the text somewhere in the named items file. It'll probably look a little more sense when we actually look at the get named items file. So if I load one, I'll go to named items and load a file. And let's say that I set up specific department lists for specific users. So let's say I've got a particular file here. Let's open that, and I only require a single line, basically just some random text that makes sense to me that won't be actual text in the database. I'll say department OK, and the lookup value will be the department code this user is allowed to see. So once I load that and then refresh the view, now you can see that only transactions for that particular department are loaded. And if I happen to load a different named item file, I'll load file, and I'll pick a different user. This one happens to have 100, 200, so this particular user is allowed to see two specific departments based on the text file. And so now if I refresh this, now you can see that 100 and 200 department transactions are shown, but not any of the other ones. Now to make this security conscious, what we need to do is, I'll close GridView here. As I'll edit the properties of the shortcut that the user will have, and just to highlight what you see, one of the security things is not only when it loads the program, You predefine the user ID that will be used to load the grid view. Notice that there's no /C, which means that when the user uses this view, they will not be allowed to edit the view. They will not be allowed to change the filter or not be able to load new named items file. It will load the database and the extension. It will load the workspace that's associated with that view, so that restrict department workspace. And it will predefine load the named items file that is associated with that particular user. So when I launch this workspace for this particular user, it will automatically load the workspace and it will automatically load the My Departments. I can't choose a different filter. I can't turn it off. I can't go to Edit Named Items to load a different named items file because the shortcut loaded the workspace without the security for allowing the edit of all that stuff. So this particular user will automatically load in and see just transactions for their particular department. And I'll close. And if I choose a different shortcut, which basically is identically the same shortcut, but just loading a different named items file, when it loads in, you can see that it automatically loaded the transactions for Department 100, 200. Again, they have the restrictions for being able to edit. So what you can choose to do is choose to load Adagio GridView and have security set up so that the named items file specifies what departments or salespersons or customers or items or specific transactions that they're allowed to see, and they aren't allowed to see other transactions associated with the database. So you can put data level security on a transaction. And then just to finalize that particular topic, let me just again highlight the filters that I needed to use in order to, this particular filter trims out all of the accounts in the GL that didn't have a department, so all the balance sheet accounts. It then used the find function, which is all of this particular area here, to look for the department code in the lookup on the right-hand side of the get named item line that had department OK. Remember, this was the only line, so it only had to look at one place, and starting from character 1. So this is just the way of saying you need to use this particular thing to say if there's a potential that a user might be able to see multiple departments. If they only ever allowed to see one department, you don't have to have this entire find stuff. You can just simply say get named item OK, just have this one particular line. But if they're allowed to see multiple departments, then they would require all of this. So I'll just pause there on that screen in case you're watching the recording later and you want to be able to note that information. So close the workspace. Okay, and the very last thing I'll mention about get named items before I moved on from this is that you may already have a predefined set of these get named items. You can sort of actually merge them together. And so just to show you what that might look like, so I'll go again to my named items directory. Well, I've got a list of all of my departments that I'm allowed to see, but let's say I also want to add some additional information that I have, let's say, account numbers and what type of account they are. And so I happen to have one that's already predefined, and we'll put it with Notepad. And so what I happen to have here is a named items file that says, well, if it's this account number, it's this type of account. And so hopefully that's self-explanatory. This type of information isn't stored on the GL account. It's more than just that it's an income statement account, but maybe it's a particular type of revenue or a particular type of cost or expense. And so I happen to have a named items file that lists this information out. I'd like to be able to include this information into another view. Well, I could certainly copy this and paste it into another named items file, but rather than doing that, what I can choose to do is save the path to this and then edit one of my other ones. I'll pick this one and edit it. Oops. And choose to include in square brackets and put in the path to that list. So what's the name of it? Account subtype.gv names. I got the name of that right. And save that. Account subtype.gbnames, good. Okay. So now when I open up a workspace in that restrict department, open, and load that named items file. That was the original one, just for the particular user. Now you can see not only does it have that department OK, but it also loaded in all of the account numbers. And so I'll F5 to refresh that. Now I can create a new calculated column. So account subtype using the exact same get named items type function. And the information that I want to grab is the trimmed account number. So transaction account, okay. So now we'll specify that. I could then choose perhaps to move that over here. And so now I've got my account subtype, and maybe set a sort order by that, maybe summarize it. So now what I've got is a list of all of my accounts summarized in a user-specified way using text. And I can drill down and see what are all my expenses, or drill down to see all of my sales returns. This is information that's not stored in Adagio Ledger, but it's stuff that you store externally in a text file, and you can organize information in a user-defined way. So again, that's something, hopefully that's an interesting way to more customize your information in Adagio GridView. Okay, so hopefully there's some information there, and you may not find named items as something that you use very often, but there are particular times where there's a particular type of inquiry that you want to do where you actually require this functionality because it's not available in many of the other formulas that are in Adagio GridView. Okay, the next area I'd like to talk about is the ability of exporting to Excel. And certainly you've always been able to open up a workspace and open up an inquiry and say I want to be able to export this to Excel. Now, what I've got here is a workspace, and I've got two particular views. And if I were to say export to Excel, it would only export the single view to an Excel spreadsheet, and it would ignore the other one. And so if you want to be able to say export the entire workspace to Excel in a single workbook, maybe you've got multiple views that's interesting to have, I want this one on page 1 and this one on page 2, then you can choose to export the information to Excel in a multiple workbook as part of the shortcut parameters when you load Adagio GridView. So let me just close this. And what I've got here is a GridView, where did it go? Here. So I'll just look at the properties. And we've always been able to, once you specify the target and where's the database and the user ID, use a /W to automatically load a workspace when you export, or sorry, when you load GridView. So if I were to use this shortcut, it would not only load GridView, but it will automatically load the workspace. So that's something that's always been available. But now let's add the additional step of being able to export it to Excel. So let me just close this. So let's change the properties of the shortcut. And instead of using /W in order to load the view, what I'm going to do is change that to XDW. So /XDW and then the location and the name of the workspace that you want to load. XDW stands for Excel Direct the Workspace. So when I do that and I load the shortcut now, what it will do is it will automatically load the workspace and then send it to Excel. And so if I go and look at my views directory, it will create a new folder called XD Views, and that's underneath the default directory where you save your views and your workspaces. And it will create a workspace where I've got my PO details on this page and my OE items on that page. And you'll notice that as soon as it ran the grid view, it exported to Excel and then it shut down again. And so you could have a single shortcut automatically send the information to Excel. And you can do this as often as you're required to. Let's take this the next take it the next step further. Let's say that you do this on a daily basis, and you don't want, if you were to do it again, it would overwrite. But if you want to be able to say one exported spreadsheet every day, I can add an additional parameter, xdd, oops, not a question mark, I want a forward slash. And what the xdd parameter means is put a subdirectory that is based on today's date. So if I run this parameter shortcut again, it will export it to Excel. And oops, if I go and find the XD views, you'll see that it created another folder that had today's date on it, February 16th. And then there's the folder inside. And so basically what you'll end up doing is you'll have your XD views, and you'll have one folder for each day. And so that allows you to better organize, perhaps, these spreadsheets if you export them on a regular basis. Something else you also might want to do is, let's say that these spreadsheets are security specific, so that you want to have this spreadsheet exported to a place where other users really shouldn't be browsing around. So what you can do is you can change this XDW parameter and change it instead to XDP. And essentially this means Excel Direct with some security. So when I apply this and run the Excel in the workbook, it will export it. And then if we go to the XD views, you'll see that it created a subdirectory based on your user ID in Adagio. And what you can do is you can make this particular folder only allowed for you as a user through Windows security or through network security, so that you're the only user that's able to access. And then within that will be the spreadsheet. So you can go ahead and create things that way. And you can also organize this with that XDD parameter. So within the sys directory, you can have your February 16th, 2011, February 17th, 2011. So you can use that XDD date parameter in order to separate each of your Excel spreadsheets on a daily basis. So all that's also available for you as well too. And one last thing I'd like to identify with this is, let's say that you want to be able to load a particular filter for a particular view that's in the workspace. So let's say that not only do I want to load this information, but I also want to say I want to see just today's sales. And there may be multiple filters associated with the view, and you want to ensure that the appropriate filter is loaded. So what I can do is I can add a parameter called XDF, so Excel Direct with Filter, and then within a double quotes, put the name of the view, items on back order. So that's the name of the view that you want to look for a filter, and then a colon, and then the name of the filter that you want to be able to load. So this particular function says, when I do this export to Excel Direct, automated, I will grab a filter from the OE items on BO view name and look for the filter called Orders Today. So now when I launch this shortcut, it'll go ahead and do that Excel Direct, and you can see that it quickly loaded just a specific set of transactions. So if I go into my view here and load it up, we can see that instead of the entire list of transactions, it only happened to grab a filter that's based on today's orders. And so this is a way that you can, if you were to automate this, you know, an hour before you came into work in the morning, then you have a spreadsheet that shows a quick list of all of the outstanding orders for today. And instead of having to double click on an icon, how could you go about having this automatically load for you? Well, let's just go back. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the entire shortcut parameters here. Control, copy all that. And if you're using a Windows server, you can set up a Windows scheduled task in order to do this for you. And I'm just going to go through the basics on how to do this. And I see that we're just about at the end of our hour, so I think this will be our last thing for today. So if you want to be able to set up a Windows scheduled task, I'm using Windows 7 in order to do this, but Windows Vista will be very much the same, and Windows XP will be pretty similar too, although you might have to find the tasks in a slightly different way. In order to do this in Windows Vista or Windows 7, you can go to the Control Panel and then click on System and Security. And then within the Administrative Tools area, there's a place where you can schedule tasks. And when I load this up, then this is just simply a basic task, which is basically a wizard in order to create tasks for you. And if you're not so familiar with this, creating a basic task is the way to go. You can see this over here on the right-hand side. And so it's going to take a moment to load up my window. There we go. Okay, so here's a name. Output today's orders and related POs to Excel. Or you might want to have that in the description, and then just simply have the name being, GridView Excel Direct, whatever you might want to do. You can choose to do it as a daily task or a weekly task that only works on certain days of the week. So you can say only do Monday to Friday, or you can do daily, or just once, or once a month, or how often you do it. Maybe we'll just choose one time for this example, but you can certainly set up a number of different ways. And set the time that you want to do it. Well, if you're going to be doing it overnight, you might want to do it, maybe at 8 o'clock p.m. when everyone's going to be out of the office. And so at 8 o'clock, this task will trigger on your workstation. And what do you want it to do? Well, it's a grid view, so you want it to start a program. And what program do you want to launch? Well, you want to launch grid view. So let me just paste all this without all of those parameters. So I'll just new call that. So you want to launch GridView from wherever your GridView program is, and add arguments. Those are the additional parameters. So I'll paste those in, and let's just highlight all the way to the end and get rid of the C soft track and the exe. So basically all those / things that you have as your shortcut parameters, those are your arguments. And then here's the information, and finish. And so now we've created a task. And if we go through the list, I'm not sure we'll be in the list, there we go. So there's your GridView export that we did output today. And so at 8 o'clock today, this task will run automated. So I don't even have to click that shortcut. It will run exactly as if I had clicked that shortcut. So that's just a way of being able to do a scheduled task, in this case for GridView, to automate sending one or more. You can create multiple tasks. Maybe you can stagger them to every 15 minutes, or depending on how long it takes to generate the spreadsheet. So you can have multiple GridView workspaces automatically set out information to Excel spreadsheets ready for you in the morning. So hopefully that information is interesting in order to automate the sending of the Excel Direct to Excel, not just while you're working in a workspace, but you can also do automated. And this function also allows you, with all those XDWs and XDPs, in order to have multiple views in the same workspace and the same Excel spreadsheet when you export it. So that's all we have for today. I do apologize for not getting to the row formatting by column. It's just a quick tip. Maybe I'll try to incorporate that the next time we do the session. If you have any further questions about what we've shown in Adagio GridView, certainly take advantage of the technical support form. If you